After meditating for a little bit, I started to think that these films are not just films for children or for the general public. It is rather a work that gives us everything from the most normal and happy scenes to the crudest and most dangerous ones that only reality could give us. And every single time you see it again, you will notice that not two innocent things happen in this story. If you're ready, let's begin. First, I'll give you all the pieces you need to put together the conspiracy theory. Then, I'd like to know your opinion in the comment section. Alright. We all know that the NSA is the agency who cover all the damage caused by these heroes in addition to relocating them as a result of it. But how much, or to what extent, did the government finance these superheroes through these agencies, you might be wondering? Because, like the Army or the Navy, the cost of maintaining this super must have been a lot too. In the second movie, we can confirm that by Wilson Dever Jr.'s speech. He mentioned that Mr. Incredible's acts are so expensive and out of budget even for someone like him. And in case you didn't think about it, the investors took care not only of their activities as supers, but also their secret entities. So, from the suits made by Edna to the weapons or vehicle used by the supers, they were all sponsored by the government, like Mr. Incredible's supercar that he used to attend his own wedding. But at the end, it wasn't really his car, was it? And we can easily guess how expensive a superhero suit or vehicle can be just by looking at Edna's mansion, for example, and the suit's qualities. Or the supercar that can change its own appearance, of course. However, that does not mean that the problems of a super are far from being like those of any other person, and certainly, even worse sometimes. Even the politicians and the government themselves who, over the time, were forced to generate laws for the ban of the same heroes. At first, it seems ridiculous that an entire movement has been created in such of a simple way by someone like Oliver Sunsweet, by just suing Mr. Incredible for saving his life. And in case you don't remember, we didn't have any more details about who this person was or who he could be. However, in the same movie, we can get some ideas with certain details. The suicide attempt occurred around dusk. The guy was waiting there long enough for the police to arrive and people to gather around. And the most important thing was that the guy was not on any building just like that. It was a bank. So, he must have had access to restricted areas to be able to access the roof, which means that he could easily be a junior executive of the same bank. We also know that for enough people and police to gather at the place, the guy had to be there long enough. However, why did he only jump after Mr. Incredible appeared? Just think about that. A guy waiting to jump from an area that we don't know how he could have access to, in a bank building. Plus, it was time when it should have been closed, and for some reason, after all that time waiting there, he just decided to jump until a superhero appeared on the scene. And just speculating, we can conclude that he did it in order to be safe and then sue the hero for frustration of suicide, which is ridiculous. And based on what happened after that, we can deduce that Mr. Incredible had actually a terrible lawyer in this. As we know, the lawsuit had a good end for the possible banker, but so bad for Mr. Incredible. And not enough with that, only 5 days later, a group of civilians decided to sue the hero also for being saved, which they all won. And of course, it had to be paid by the government. I want you to remember these details because they will be useful later. Thinking about it carefully, the ban of superheroes was supposedly due to the concern of the population. However, after determining that all the expenses we already talked about, plus the possible cost of future lawsuits against other supers, the ban was purely economic. So they decided it was better to disappear them from public view before that happened. The government then expected that all their economical problems related with supers will be gone after this. But there was someone they didn't count with. Wilson Dever Sr. He was one of the greatest benefactors of superheroes, as his son said in the second movie, even having close ties with important heroes like Acer Beam. So, although it is not mentioned in the films, don't you find it curious that just after the ban of the supers, an alleged robbery occurred in one of the properties of these benefactors? And I say alleged robbery because if it had been like that, there wasn't really need to assassinate the benefactor, right? Seemed more like a scheme by the government to silence one of the biggest sponsors of the supers, making a fight for the rights of supers to be even more complicated with the socioeconomic phones. But not impossible, at least not for too long, because the same Guy Servien will continue supporting supers under his real name, Simon J. Palladino. Do you remember this guy, Guy Servien? He had a good end too, right? So, in the first movie, it is very interesting, but once we know that Palladino has been missing, it is just simply announced at the news, just like that. It's very normal. And it gets even more creepy since we all know that the government was always aware of the activities of all these supers even after the ban. So why does it seem like they did nothing after noticing so many supers were missing? And that's not it. Okay, just thinking that the main antagonist, at least in the first movie, was Syndrome, who is the cause of all these missing heroes, had not only a huge private island and a state-of-the-art infrastructure, highly armed guards all over the place, and what apparently seemed to be infinite phones. And don't get me wrong, in the second movie I perfectly understand that Evelyn had a lot of money since her father was millionaire and she has his own television station. But all of that is not even enough to own that much like Syndrome. But beyond the fact that Syndrome was a genius and probably had too many patents, would not really justify so much money to sponsor everything he had. And all that without mentioning the most important point, and what mainly made me think about this video. And that is, if the lives of these superheroes were private, their identities completely secret, even their disasters or problems covered by the same government, and only they were aware of their activities, how come it was so easy for someone like Syndrome to find them, all those who were his victims? How could he know where to find them if they were all relocated and protected by the same government, among many other unknowns related to him? It leads me to the conclusion that Syndrome was definitely working with government, or the NSA to be more precise. So, finally connecting all the details, we can easily think that after the lawsuit against Mr. Incredible and all the money that could be lost in having to pay all the possible similar cases, since people began to notice that it was quite profitable to do so, the government then decided to ban the supers. But without taking into account the private sponsors who continue supporting them. So the same government, seeing themselves unable to eliminate them all, decided to take the problem from the root by directly killing all of the supers. And all of that through third parties who were in charge of doing the dirty work, in exchange for sponsorship, weapons, and we don't know what more. But doing it in the only way possible for them, since killing a simple old man in his own house is one thing, but killing supers was not so simple, and even more important, out of the public view. So having a mad genius capable of creating weapons and machines that can kill supers, it was much easier and more economical for the government to get rid of all the supers one by one, but through Syndrome, while no one will ever notice, making him actually the perfect scapegoat. Because if something bad happened, they could just simply accuse him, and the government could easily hide all the information and silence whoever was necessary. But in the end, it will be clean and free of supers, making it the perfect plan. And just in case you still don't believe it, why Rick Dicker, the government agent and friend of the Incredibles, knew who Syndrome was even before capturing him? How they froze all his phones without even knowing who he was? Or did they? I want you to think about that a little bit, because if they knew who he was, it would actually match everything else. But alright, now I would like to know your opinion in case you have anything else I didn't see. I hope you liked the video, and if you did, don't forget to subscribe and activate the bell so you don't miss the next videos. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you again.